Judge tries to silence black woman in court not knowing she's a top CIA intelligence officer. This is outrageous. The prosecutor slammed the table. You stole classified data and now you expect us to believe you're innocent? Dr. Nadia West didn't blink. Surrounded by evidence, judged by a biased court, she knew the truth. She wasn't the thief. She was a CIA operative, and someone had set her up. But who? And why? Stay tuned because this trial is about to expose a secret no one saw coming. And before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories like this. The early summer sun was unrelenting in its heat, casting long rays through the massive windows of the John Marshall Courthouse. By 9 in the morning, the narrow corridors bustled with anxious attorneys, hurried paralegals, and curious onlookers eager to catch a glimpse of the day's most talked-about case. Voices bounced off marble walls, and the clattering of heels and loafers merged into a dull roar. Seated at the defense table was Dr. Nadia West, a poised black woman in her early 40s. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, her hair cropped short in a stylish fade that highlighted the graceful angles of her face. She seemed calm, too calm, some thought, for someone under indictment. Only the faintest hint of tension in her jawline suggested the storm raging beneath her collected surface. Judge Harrison Davis, a tall, wiry man in his late 50s, presided over courtroom 7. He had a stern posture, his eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene. Known for his impatience and firm hand on the gavel, Davis had built a reputation for handing down harsh sentences. Today's case, however, was no ordinary matter of white-collar crime. The prosecution had framed it as a corporate espionage scandal of grand proportions, with Dr. West at its epicenter. Reporters from local and national outlets crowded the back rows, scribbling notes and snapping discreet photos. The whir of a news camera's shutter echoed faintly as Judge Davis took his seat. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. The Honorable Judge Harrison Davis presiding. Everyone stood. Nadia rose fluidly, meeting the judge's gaze with a calm expression. She could feel the stares, the curiosity swirling around her. Yet her heart thumped a steady, prepared rhythm. Whatever came next, she was ready. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Blythe Nichols, was known for her meticulous approach. A petite woman with sharp intellect, Nichols had spent months preparing for this high-profile trial. Her opening statement left no doubt about the angle she intended to pursue. "Members of the jury," Nichols began, pacing before the seated jurors. "This is a case about betrayal and deception. Dr. Nadia West was a highly regarded executive at Vantage Biotech, a company devoted to cutting-edge medical research. Yet she allegedly stole proprietary information, critical formulas, intellectual property, and strategic plans, and transmitted that data to outside entities." The courtroom went silent as she paused for effect. Nichols' voice was measured, her words striking with precision. "This theft jeopardized millions of dollars in investments and potentially placed life-saving research in the hands of unknown parties. Today we will show you evidence of Dr. West's wrongdoing, from financial transactions to encrypted communications. You will come to see that she abused her position of trust and power." Nadia watched impassively, her back straight, fingers interlaced on the table. She had anticipated these accusations, had read them in detail through the mountain of discovery materials. Yet each time she heard the words, it stung anew, like a careful needle pricking at her composure. When the prosecutor finished, Nadia's defense attorney, Michael Faber, rose for his own opening statement. Faber was a middle-aged man with silver hair and a calm presence that usually put juries at ease. But this time, even his soft-spoken style felt overshadowed by the heavy allegations. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, casting a sympathetic glance toward Nadia. "The prosecution will present a story of theft and betrayal, but let me assure you, there is another side. A much more complex truth. Dr. West is not a thief. She was not acting out of greed or malice. In fact, we will prove she had legitimate reasons to handle the data, and that those reasons, if they were fully disclosed, would clear her name instantly." Judge Davis arched a brow. Confine yourself to the evidence, Mr. Faber. We're not here for insinuations or theatrics. Faber nodded quickly. Of course, Your Honor. The evidence will show Dr. West's innocence. We ask that you keep an open mind until all facts have been revealed. Nadia exhaled quietly. There was so much that could not be said, at least not yet. The audience watched her with a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. The tension in the air was palpable, and Judge Davis's gaze flickered between the defense table and the jury, his expression already tinged with impatience. After opening statements, the prosecution began calling its witnesses: a forensic accountant, an IT security specialist, a mid-level researcher from Vantage Biotech. Each time the questions led inexorably to the same point: encrypted files, suspiciously timed bank transfers, and digital footprints pointing to Dr. West. Nadia listened intently, resisting the urge to jump up and correct the record. She felt the weight of every sideways glance, every whisper in the gallery. Her rational mind reminded her that the game was still afoot. There was more to come, and she had to maintain her composure. Midway through the afternoon, Judge Davis leaned forward, eyes pinning Nadia's defense attorney. Mr. Faber, does the defense intend to cross-examine this witness, or shall we move on? Faber rose, clearing his throat. Yes, Your Honor. Briefly. He approached the witness, an IT expert named Ryan Spector, who had testified about traces of unauthorized downloads from Vantage Biotech's secure servers. Spector was young, with a crisp suit and an air of self-importance. Mr. Spector, Faber began, you identified the IP address from which these downloads were made. Is that correct? Yes. It traced back to Dr. West's secured workstation. Spector replied confidently. And you're certain there were no other possible sources? Spector shrugged. I can't speak to physical infiltration if that's what you mean. But as far as digital footprints go, it's conclusive. Faber nodded slowly. Are you aware that certain individuals might have the ability to spoof an IP address or impersonate a workstation within the network? Spector pursed his lips. Theoretically, yes, but it would be extremely difficult. We found no evidence. Judge Davis rapped his gavel lightly. Mr. Faber, get to the point. Faber tried to maintain his calm. Yes, Your Honor. My point is simply that the presence of digital footprints does not necessarily prove Dr. West herself was behind these actions. As Faber resumed his seat, Nadia noticed Judge Davis staring at her. Something in his eyes spoke of skepticism, or maybe condescension. She wasn't sure which. It was as though he was already convinced of her guilt. All right, the judge said, turning to the prosecutor. Miss Nichols, call your next witness. Nadia flexed her fingers under the table, trying to relax. She reminded herself of her training, the rigorous mental preparation she had endured for years. She was used to high-stress environments, though usually not on public display. A slight grin tugged at the corner of her mouth. If only these people knew what she was truly capable of, and why she was actually there. That evening, long after the courthouse halls had emptied and the media frenzy had moved on to speculate on the next day's developments, Nadia found herself alone in her modest hotel suite. She'd chosen to stay in a nondescript business district hotel to maintain a low profile. Her nerves, generally steady, now vibrated with restless energy. She booted up her encrypted laptop, triple-checking that she was connected to a secure network. The screen lit up with a CIA seal as she initiated a covert communications channel. A login prompt materialized, followed by a request for biometric identification. Nadia pressed her thumb against a small scanner. A moment later, her digital presence was verified, and she was granted access. An older man's face filled the screen. Agent Marcus Powell, her handler within the CIA's Directorate of Operations. The years had etched lines across his brow, and streaks of gray peeked through his short-cropped hair. Nadia, he said, voice low and grave, the situation is worse than we thought. Are you holding up? She nodded. I'm fine. The prosecution laid out their case today, but it's all circumstantial evidence. The problem is that I can't reveal my true role in open court. Powell exhaled. We're working on that. Washington's in a bind about how much can be declassified. This entire mission was buried under the old Operation Chaos protocols. Technically, it was repurposed for internal intel gathering on corporations with foreign infiltration. It's highly sensitive. Nadia's jaw tightened. She was intimately aware of the complexities. Her entire infiltration at Vantage Biotech had been orchestrated to unearth a foreign mole, allegedly siphoning medical breakthroughs. "I can't just stand there and let them convict me," she said, her voice rising. "Either the agency steps in, or I'm going to blow my cover myself." Powell's eyes flickered with concern. "We're negotiating behind the scenes to see what can be disclosed without jeopardizing other ops. In the meantime, do what you can with your lawyer. Once we get the green light, I'll appear in person if necessary." Nadia rubbed her temples. "All right. Thanks, Marcus." "We appreciate your sacrifice," Powell said. "Don't let them break you. We'll come through." After the call ended, Nadia shut her laptop and leaned back against the headboard, eyes closed. She was playing a dangerous game, one where her cover identity was on a collision course with the legal system. The mission had demanded secrecy. Now, to avoid a wrongful conviction, she might have to tear that secrecy apart, revealing her CIA ties to the world. No matter how carefully she had prepared, she could never have foreseen a corrupt or biased judge complicating things. She recalled Judge Davis's steely gaze in court, and how quickly he dismissed her defense. Her instincts told her something else was at play, something that might tie into the broader conspiracy. However, she had no definitive proof. Eventually, Nadia forced herself to sleep, repeating a mental mantra from her agency training. "Stay calm, stay sharp, the truth will come out." The next morning, the air was electric with tension even before the proceedings began. A line of spectators and journalists stretched through the hallway, buzzing about Dr. West's case. Some speculated that the day's testimony would seal the deal against her. Others whispered rumors that she might be harboring more secrets than anyone realized. Nadia took her seat beside Faber, briefly adjusting the cuffs of her blazer. Her posture was as regal as ever, but inside her mind whirled with worry about how much longer she'd be forced to remain silent. Judge Davis entered the courtroom, robes billowing. After the formalities, Assistant DA Nichols called her star witness, Thomas Aldridge, one of the senior executives at Vantage Biotech. Aldridge was in his 50s, sporting a well-tailored suit and an air of corporate gravitas. "Mr. Aldridge," Nichols began, "can you tell the court about your professional relationship with Dr. West?" Aldridge nodded solemnly. "Dr. West was head of our advanced research division. She had access to sensitive data regarding our pharmaceuticals and biotech innovations. We trusted her completely." He glanced in Nadia's direction with something akin to sorrow, though it felt theatrical. "That's why her actions cut so deeply." "Could you elaborate on the alleged unauthorized access?" Nichols pressed. Aldridge sighed as though pained. "We discovered logs indicating that Dr. West had accessed data repositories at odd hours, advanced formulas for gene therapy, CRISPR data, cutting-edge antibiotic research. Everything was downloaded. We later traced communications to an overseas server. It looked like corporate espionage, plain and simple." Nichols allowed a pause, letting the gravity of Aldridge's words sink in. Then she turned him over to the defense. Faber stepped forward, glancing at his notes. "Mr. Aldridge, you say Dr. West had unlimited access to Vantage's data, correct?" "Yes," Aldridge replied curtly. "And as head of advanced research, it wouldn't be unusual for her to be examining files at all hours, especially if she was troubleshooting or running simulations." Aldridge shrugged. "Within reason, yes, but this was more than normal work usage. You mentioned that data was sent to an overseas server. Can you confirm that the server in question wasn't simply a secure cloud environment used for research collaborations? Vantage Biotech has international partnerships, do we not?" Aldridge pursed his lips. "We do have international partners, but those servers are well documented. This one was not." Faber pressed on. "Is it possible that Dr. West was investigating a security breach rather than committing one herself?" Aldridge gave a short laugh. I find that highly unlikely. Before Faber could continue, Judge Davis interjected. Mr. Faber, we're here to assess Dr. West's alleged wrongdoing, not to propose theories without evidence. Move on. Faber forced a calm nod, but Nadia's fist clenched beneath the table. The judge was guiding the testimony, shaping it to the prosecution's narrative. She leaned over to whisper in Faber's ear, "We need to challenge him more aggressively." Faber whispered back, "He's shutting me down every time, but we'll keep trying." The cross-examination ended with little gained for the defense. Aldridge stepped down with a triumphant aura, while the prosecutor flashed a smug smile. The gavel banged. Court was in recess for lunch. As Nadia stood, she caught Judge Davis's eye again. His expression flickered. Annoyance, or perhaps something else. A chill snaked up Nadia's spine. She felt like a chess piece on his board, and he was determined to checkmate her. During the lunch break, Nadia walked to a nearby park, ignoring the summer heat. A fountain splashed in the background. Children chased each other across the grass, and office workers hurried by with takeout. She found a quiet bench, wanting solitude to think. She drifted into memory, a flashback to Langley, Virginia, home of the CIA's headquarters. It had been nearly 2 years ago when she first stepped into a secure briefing room. A steel table, fluorescent lights, and Agent Marcus Powell waiting with a thick dossier under his arm. "The agency has reason to believe," he'd said then, sliding the dossier across, "that Vantage Biotech has been compromised. There's an international player pulling strings from behind the scenes. They've embedded a mole at the highest levels. We need you to go in under your real identity, pose as a star researcher, and figure out who it is." Nadia had been taken aback. She was used to more traditional intelligence operations, monitoring diplomatic cables, analyzing foreign threats, infiltration in foreign territories. The directive to investigate a domestic biotech company was unusual, though not unheard of. Operation Chaos had originally been shut down in the 1970s, but certain protocols lived on under new guises, especially in national security contexts. "Why me?" she'd asked. "Because you have the PhD in molecular biology," Powell replied, "and you're one of our top field operatives. You can blend in, earn their trust. None of the other agents have your scientific background. We need you, Nadia." Despite her initial hesitations about investigating a US-based corporation, the mission was clear. Foreign infiltration was suspected, and the technology at stake, life-saving medical breakthroughs, was too important to let slip into hostile hands. She'd accepted, vowing to do whatever it took to secure the data. That vow had led her into the storm she faced now, indicted on espionage charges herself. How ironic, she thought, that the real criminals remained hidden while she stood accused. The memory of Powell's voice urging her to remain composed echoed in her mind. "We appreciate your sacrifice." With resolve strengthening her spirit, Nadia rose from the park bench and headed back to the courthouse. She would not break, not yet. The afternoon session brought a new wave of tension. As soon as Judge Davis took his seat, he frowned at the defense table. "Mr. Faber, how many more witnesses do you plan to call?" Faber glanced at the clock on the wall. "We have at least 3 more, Your Honor." The judge sighed audibly. "We need to keep these proceedings efficient. The court's docket is full." Nadia felt her anger stir. Efficiency was one thing, but the judge was essentially rushing a complex case. She exchanged a look with Faber, who lowered his eyes. The defense's first witness that afternoon was a cybersecurity consultant hired by Faber. She testified that hacking or spoofing a workstation within a corporate network wasn't impossible, noting that well-resourced adversaries could leave minimal trace. The second witness was one of Nadia's former colleagues at Vantage, who spoke to her impeccable character and how she had often worked overtime to fix data vulnerabilities. Yet each time these witnesses offered testimony that pointed toward Nadia's possible innocence, Judge Davis cut them short with dismissive remarks. When Faber tried to introduce the notion of an external mole or infiltration, the judge overruled him for lack of concrete evidence. Nadia's frustration mounted. She felt trapped in a system rigged against her. Every question was met with skepticism, every explanation dismissed as irrelevant. She sensed something personal in the judge's tone, something beyond just a preference for swift proceedings. As the court adjourned for the day, Nadia stood to leave. She overheard a brief exchange near the judge's bench. Judge Davis spoke to a clerk in a low voice, but she caught fragments. Tired of these defenses, no respect, her attitude. The words stung. She turned away, swallowing her anger. If only he knew who she really was, what was truly at stake. Outside, a throng of reporters blocked the entrance, microphones thrust forward. Dr. West, do you have any comment on today's proceedings? Are you guilty? Is Vantage Biotech pressing for maximum punishment? Are you a spy? She said nothing, slipping into a black SUV with tinted windows. The door slammed shut, and the driver maneuvered away from the media scrum. Nadia closed her eyes, heart pounding. The narrative was turning toxic in the public sphere. With the judge nudging it along, the path to clearing her name seemed more perilous than ever. That night, Nadia lay wide awake in bed. A glass of water sat on the nightstand, untouched. Outside, the city glimmered with skyscraper lights. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. If the CIA's negotiations to reveal her cover identity didn't bear fruit soon, the jury might convict her. Once a conviction was handed down, not even the truth might unravel that legally. Finally, unable to stand the pressure, she opened her secure laptop again. Instead of contacting Powell, she recorded a private video message, something akin to a confession, just in case the worst happened. Her voice was low, steady. My name is Dr. Nadia West. I am a covert officer for the Central Intelligence Agency, assigned to investigate infiltration at Vantage Biotech. The charges against me are false, fabricated by the real perpetrators who remain at large. If this recording finds its way to the public, it means the legal system has failed me. She paused, inhaling sharply to keep her composure. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose in her, fear, anger, and a fierce determination to see justice done. I never thought I'd be in a position where my own government secrecy could end my life and career, but I still believe in the truth. I still believe we can expose those behind this conspiracy. She ended the recording, encrypted it, and stored it in a secure folder. Then, with a heavy heart, she closed the laptop and tried to get some rest, her mind a whirl of contingency plans and desperate hopes. Day 3 of the trial dawned gray and overcast, as if the summer sun itself had withdrawn in anticipation of darker revelations. Inside courtroom 7, a hush settled as Assistant DA Nichols announced a new piece of evidence. We have recently obtained financial records from an overseas account linked to Dr. West, Nichols declared. She flashed a satisfied smile at the jury. These documents show significant deposits made within the last 8 weeks, deposits that coincide with the alleged data theft. Nadia froze. She knew of no such account. Could it be part of the frame-up? She leaned over to Faber, whispering, "We need to see those documents immediately." Faber nodded, his features drawn in concern. "Your Honor," he protested, "we were not given proper notice of this evidence." Nichols replied smoothly, "We only received it last night from an international partner. I'm providing it as soon as possible."
Judge Davis glanced at the papers, unimpressed by the defense's complaint. "Mr. Faber, you'll have time to review, but we'll proceed." Nadia's gut churned. The documents were passed around, and sure enough, they indicated large sums of money transferred into an account bearing her name. It looked damning. She squeezed her fists beneath the table, remembering her covert training. Don't panic. Assess the situation. If she let her anger flare now, it could ruin her credibility in front of the jury. In cross-examination, Faber tried to cast doubt. "Miss Nichols, do you have any direct evidence that Dr. West personally opened or used this account?" Nichols shrugged delicately. "We have a matching name, date of birth, and partial social security number. It's quite a coincidence if it's not her." Judge Davis eyed Nadia as though the puzzle pieces were falling neatly into place. Nadia stared back, unflinching. Inside, she was seething. This had to be the work of someone from Vantage Biotech or the unknown mole, forging her details to secure the frame. Yet how to prove it? Before Faber could continue, the judge signaled him to wrap up. "Enough," Davis announced. "We'll allow the jury to consider this evidence." Nadia's heart pounded. The prosecution had escalated their campaign, and the judge seemed to be letting them break procedural rules left and right. The tide of public opinion and judicial bias threatened to engulf her. She prayed the CIA's intervention would arrive soon, or else she might go under. That evening, in the dimly lit corridor outside the courtroom, Nadia cornered Aldridge. He was on his phone, presumably heading home after the day's session. She approached slowly, her expression tense but controlled. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, voice cool. He turned, startled. "Dr. West, what do you want?" She lowered her voice, conscious of passers-by. "I need to ask you something. How sure are you about the origin of those new bank statements? It doesn't strike you as suspicious that they surfaced last minute. No chance for verification?" Aldridge's gaze flicked away. "I'm sure the prosecution vetted them. They wouldn't risk forging evidence." Nadia's eyes narrowed. She sensed a certain evasiveness in his posture. Maybe not. But if someone at Vantage is behind this, they might have ways to manipulate official documents. You're a smart man. Doesn't something about this entire situation feel off to you? Aldridge's lips twitched in discomfort. He took a step back, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "Look, Dr. West, even if there's more to the story, it's out of my hands. The board at Vantage wants this matter resolved. We can't afford bad press." Nadia felt a surge of frustration. "So you'd rather see me take the fall to protect your stock prices?" He let out a weary sigh, but said nothing else. Without waiting for her response, Aldridge turned and strode down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. Nadia stared after him, a knot of anger and despair tightening in her stomach. Late in the evening, when nearly everyone had vacated the courthouse, Judge Davis sat in his chambers, reviewing paperwork by the glow of a desk lamp. The silhouette of his lanky frame looked etched in worry as he flipped through documents. A half-empty cup of coffee stood on the edge of his desk. A quiet knock on the door caused him to glance up. "Yes?" A slender figure stepped inside, face partially obscured by shadow. "Harrison," the figure whispered. Davis's eyebrows furrowed. "We can't be seen talking in private." "It's necessary," the figure insisted. "This case can't go sideways. You promised a swift resolution." Davis removed his reading glasses. "I'm doing my part, but the defense is pushing back harder than expected." The figure moved closer, the dim light catching a hint of a tailored suit. "Push back harder. We can't afford a prolonged trial that exposes too much about Vantage Biotech's affairs. The board is getting nervous." A flicker of unease crossed the judge's face. "I can't just blatantly railroad her in front of the jury. Even I have limits." "Find a way," the figure said coldly, "or this entire arrangement blows up." A tense silence stretched. Finally, Davis gave a curt nod. Without another word, the figure slipped out, leaving Davis alone with the knowledge of his compromised position. He rubbed a shaking hand across his forehead, the weight of corruption and secrecy pressing down on him.
Morning came too quickly. Nadia arrived at the courthouse with new resolve burning in her eyes. She'd spent another sleepless night strategizing with Faber. Something bigger was at play, and if the judge was in on it, her chances dwindled by the hour. The day's session opened with more prosecution witnesses. Nichols droned on about how Dr. West had unique motivations and unfettered access. Then came an unexpected development. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to move for an expedited conclusion of the evidence," Nichols said. "Given the overwhelming testimony, we believe it's best to avoid further delay." Nadia's blood ran cold. Was Nichols pushing for an immediate jury deliberation? She glanced at Faber, who jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor," he said, voice resonating through the courtroom. "We have crucial witnesses yet to be heard. This is wholly premature." Judge Davis ran a hand across his chin. His eyes flicked to the gallery, then back to the defense table. For a moment, Nadia thought she saw guilt flicker in his gaze. Then he cleared his throat. "I will allow the defense one more witness before we consider the motion." Only one witness. Nadia's heart hammered. She leaned over and whispered to Faber, "We need to bring in Marcus Powell. Now." Faber nodded, understanding the gravity. He stood again. "We call Agent Marcus Powell to the stand." A ripple of confusion spread across the courtroom. Powell's name was new to everyone except Nadia. The double doors at the back swung open, and in walked Marcus Powell, wearing a crisp navy suit. He moved with steady purpose down the aisle. The hush that fell was profound. "This is highly irregular," Nichols said, scowling. "Who is this witness?" "You'll find out," Faber replied calmly. After Powell was sworn in, Faber approached. "Agent Powell, could you state your full name and occupation for the record?" Powell's voice was firm. "My name is Marcus Powell. I am a senior operative with the Central Intelligence Agency's Directorate of Operations." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Judge Davis stared, blinking. Nichols exchanged stunned looks with her co-counsel. Nadia's face remained stoic, but inside, relief and anxiety intertwined. This was the moment that could save her, if the judge didn't quash it. Faber pressed on. "And what is your connection to the defendant, Dr. Nadia West?" Powell laced his fingers together. "She is also an operative of the CIA, codenamed Agent 47B. She was assigned to infiltrate Vantage Biotech as part of a covert investigation into foreign infiltration under the umbrella of an old initiative codenamed Operation Chaos." An uproar ensued. Reporters scrambled to record every word. Spectators murmured loudly, and Judge Davis rapped his gavel. "Order! Quiet in the court!" Nadia watched the judge, waiting for the inevitable attempt to suppress Powell's testimony. But Powell pressed forward before Davis could stop him. "Dr. West's mission," Powell continued, voice rising above the chaos, "was to identify the real source of data leaks at Vantage Biotech. She was authorized by the CIA to access sensitive information in order to track down a mole funneling research to foreign entities." The jury seemed spellbound. Even some of the more skeptical faces softened. Judge Davis's expression was a mixture of shock and anger. Nichols, regaining her composure, jumped up. "Objection. This is irrelevant to the charges of theft and corporate espionage." Faber countered. "This is directly relevant, Your Honor. If Dr. West was authorized by the government, she had no criminal intent." Judge Davis looked cornered. He glanced around, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he spoke through clenched teeth. "Overruled. The witness may continue." Powell explained how the CIA's internal records and a chain of command existed to prove Nadia's covert status. He also mentioned that the foreign infiltration threatened U.S. medical security, a matter of national importance. By the time he finished, the courtroom was electric with tension, the narrative fully transformed. As Powell stepped down, Nichols tried to regain control, but her cross-examination floundered. Every attempt to discredit Powell's claims was met with polite, clear rebuttals. On top of that, Powell hinted that the CIA had logs of false bank accounts and digital footprints planted to incriminate Nadia. Judge Davis, trapped between his compromised deals and the unstoppable force of national security, sat stiffly. His veneer of impartiality cracked. The atmosphere in courtroom 7 shifted. People began to realize that Nadia might be the wronged party. When Nichols concluded her questioning, she made one last attempt to dismiss the CIA testimony. "Your Honor, I move to strike this entire line of evidence as classified and inadmissible." Powell interjected. "We have official approval to disclose this specific operation in order to exonerate Dr. West. You've seen the documentation." Nichols scowled, but said nothing more. The judge, red-faced, had no choice but to allow the testimony to stand. Outside the windows, thunder rumbled, as if nature itself reacted to the storm inside. Nadia looked at the jury. For the first time, she sensed their sympathy. The aura of guilt projected onto her had vanished. replaced by a recognition of her covert heroism. Yet one question remained. Would it be enough to offset the judge's apparent bias? In a dramatic turn, the defense recalled Thomas Aldridge for more testimony. Now confronted with Powell's disclosures, Aldridge squirmed under the spotlight. "Mr. Aldridge," Faber said, "Agent Powell just testified that Dr. West was investigating infiltration at Vantage Biotech. Is it true the company had concerns about foreign interests in your research?" Aldridge hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, we had concerns, but I wasn't aware of a formal CIA operation." "Are you aware that the forged overseas account in Dr. West's name could have originated within the company's own systems to frame her?" Aldridge swallowed hard. I don't know anything about that." Faber pressed on. "Isn't it true that certain board members at Vantage might prefer Dr. West to take the fall rather than face the reality of a mole at the executive level?" Nichols objected, but the judge, under the watchful eye of an astonished courtroom, allowed the question. Aldridge's cheeks reddened. He looked over at Nadia, then at the judge, and mumbled, "It's possible. I can't speak for the board's motives." A stunned hush filled the room. Nadia's breath came quicker. This was a breakthrough. The company's guilt was finally slipping into public view. Judge Davis cleared his throat and addressed the jury. "We will recess for 15 minutes, he announced. The gavel fell, but it did little to quell the speculation buzzing through the crowd. During the short recess, the corridors teemed with excitement. Reporters huddled in corners, streaming live updates. Words like CIA, cover-up, and wrongful prosecution echoed off marble walls. Nadia could barely walk 3 steps without someone trying to thrust a microphone in her face. Security guards quickly stepped in to create a path. Faber shielded Nadia from the barrage of questions, ushering her to a side hallway. They found a quiet alcove and she leaned against a wall, heart pounding. "Michael," she said softly, "I can't believe it's finally out." He gave her a reassuring nod. "We've shaken the prosecution's entire foundation. Now we just have to ensure the jury sees the truth." Nadia raised an eyebrow. "Judge Davis hasn't exactly been fair so far. We need to keep pushing." "We will," Faber promised. "We've planted enough seeds of doubt that the prosecution can't recover easily. And if it gets any worse, we'll move for a mistrial or a direct acquittal." Nadia glanced at the swirling press crowd. "What about the blowback for me personally? My CIA cover is blown. My entire professional identity is compromised." Faber sighed. "We'll handle that later. For now, let's get you cleared of criminal charges, then worry about your next steps." A fleeting sadness touched Nadia. Her life would never be the same, even if she avoided prison. She straightened her shoulders. "Focus on the moment," she told herself. "Win this battle first." When the court reconvened, Nichols tried to salvage the prosecution's case by calling forensic experts to dispute Powell's claims. But each expert's statement was overshadowed by the CIA's direct evidence. The jury seemed attentive, but no longer transfixed by Nichols's arguments. Finally, after hours of back and forth, Judge Davis announced that both sides would give closing arguments the following day. Nadia caught a glimpse of his uneasy expression. Whatever game he'd been playing with Vantage Biotech, it was unraveling, and it might destroy his reputation if the truth emerged fully. Outside, the storm that had been brewing finally broke. Rain pelted the courthouse steps, lightning forked across the sky. Nadia welcomed the downpour as she exited, feeling it wash away some of the tension that had accumulated around her like static charge. She spotted Agent Powell under the awning, waiting to speak to her. Faber discreetly left them alone. "How are you holding up?" Powell asked, concern etched into his features. Nadia managed a tight smile. "I've been better, but thank you for coming forward." Powell placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We got clearance. National Security Council recognized the situation. Your mission was too critical to let you be sacrificed." Nadia clenched her jaw. "I appreciate that. It's good to see the agency standing behind me." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "My sources indicate the judge is compromised.
There's evidence linking him to certain Vantage Board members. They're pressuring him, offering him something. Maybe political backing, maybe money. If that comes to light, his career is over. Nadia's eyes widened. That's why he's been so hostile. This runs deep. Powell nodded. Yes, but it's unraveling fast. Finish this trial strong and we'll handle the fallout. If Davis tries anything else, we'll expose him. A surge of renewed determination coursed through Nadia. She thanked Powell and dashed through the rain toward her waiting car. Tomorrow she would stand in front of the jury and present the final piece of the puzzle. Victory was within reach, but only if Judge Davis didn't sabotage it at the last second. A tense hush settled in the courtroom the next morning as the jury filed in. Media presence had doubled, with cameras and reporters jockeying for position. Nadia caught the flash of camera lights even before the judge took the bench. Assistant DA Nichols offered her closing argument first. She tried to focus on the standard points, encrypted files, suspicious activity, bank accounts, but her argument felt stale. The CIA revelation had gutted the prosecution's narrative. Even Nichols's tone suggested she was going through the motions. Then it was Faber's turn. He strode before the jury with quiet confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you've heard testimony from corporate executives, forensic experts, and even the CIA. You've seen Dr. West portrayed as both a thief and a patriot. But ask yourselves which story is supported by real evidence." He paused, letting silence emphasize his point. The prosecution relies on circumstantial fragments, digital logs, forged bank accounts, and a narrative that doesn't hold up under scrutiny. In contrast, Agent Powell of the CIA has provided documentation and testimony that Dr. West was authorized to handle Vantage's data. She was on a mission to protect national security, not undermine it. Faber's voice rose, filling the courtroom with passion. Don't let prejudice, speculation, or incomplete information cloud your judgment. Dr. West has risked her life and career to protect our country's interests. The real criminals are those who planted false trails to frame her, and who might still be operating behind the scenes. He turned to face Nadia, speaking now directly to the jury. It takes immense courage to defend the truth in the face of overwhelming opposition. Dr. West trusted our justice system, even when she could have fled or exposed her cover prematurely. Let that speak to her character. I ask you, do the right thing. Find her not guilty. As Faber returned to the defense table, Nadia felt tears threaten at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them away, offering him a grateful nod. The final act of the trial was about to commence. Judge Davis's instructions to the jury. The judge's face was pale. He stared at the assembled jury with barely concealed anxiety. He began reading the standard instructions on reasonable doubt, the definitions of corporate espionage and so forth. Yet at key points he paused, swallowing hard. It was as though he struggled with the knowledge of his own compromised position. When he finished, the jury retired to deliberate. Courtroom 7 emptied as people milled out, discussing the high drama. Nadia sat quietly at the defense table, collecting her thoughts. Faber placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's in the jury's hands now," he said gently. She nodded, heart hammering. "Let's hope they see through the lies." Outside in the corridor, a group of reporters waited, eager for comments. Nadia avoided them, heading to a small waiting room. She sat alone, staring at the blank walls, memories swirling in her mind. Her parents encouraging her love of science, her CIA training, her infiltration advantage, and the humiliating spectacle of being labeled a criminal in court. Time stretched endlessly. An hour passed, then 2. Around the 3rd hour, Faber reappeared. His face was lit with cautious optimism. "They have a verdict," he said. Nadia felt a jolt run through her. "So soon?" Faber shrugged. "We'll see." A hush blanketed the courtroom once again. The jury filed in, each member wearing a carefully neutral expression. Nadia rose, her stomach roiling with anticipation. Faber stood beside her, and Nichols stood across the aisle, jaw set. Judge Davis called for order.
Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? A middle-aged woman with short hair nodded. Yes, Your Honor, we have. Nadia heard her own heartbeat, thunderous in her ears. The foreperson cleared her throat. In the matter of the United States versus Dr. Nadia West on the charge of corporate espionage, we find the defendant not guilty. A ripple of relief, like a wave breaking on the shore, washed over Nadia. She didn't hear the rest of the foreperson's statements. She only registered the final refrain. And on the charge of misappropriation of trade secrets, we find the defendant not guilty. Reporters clamored for reaction. Faber grasped Nadia's hand, squeezing it. We did it, he murmured, voice cracking with emotion. Nadia breathed in, eyes shining. She was free. Judge Davis tried to maintain decorum. Order, court is adjourned. He banged the gavel, but the roar of applause and chaotic chatter drowned it out. Nadia was swept up by well-wishers, including Agent Powell, who managed to reach her despite the throng. A camera flash nearly blinded her. She blinked, delirious with relief. It was finally over. As Nadia stood near the bench collecting her belongings, she saw Judge Davis slip away, looking unsteady. She had no sympathy for him. The rumors of his corruption hung in the air like a poison cloud. A mere hour later, as Nadia emerged from the courthouse, a sudden uproar erupted by the main entrance. Cameras snapped, and a swarm of journalists converged around a new scene. A pair of federal officers escorting Judge Davis out in handcuffs. Nadia froze, stunned. She recognized the men. They were from the Department of Justice Inspector General's office. That's Judge Harrison Davis, indicted for judicial misconduct and conspiracy. A reporter was shouting into the camera. The crowd parted, revealing Davis's disheveled face, etched with panic and shame. He stumbled as the officers led him down the steps. Microphones thrust forward. A barrage of questions assaulted him. Judge Davis, is it true you took bribes from Vantage Biotech? Did you bias the trial against Dr. West? Nadia looked on, a strange mixture of vindication and sadness filling her. Although he had caused her immeasurable stress, seeing him like this underscored the devastating reach of corruption. Justice, it seemed, had come for him after all. Agent Powell joined her, crossing his arms. He got sloppy trying to cover for certain board members' advantage. The feds just sealed the case. Nadia nodded slowly, feeling a quiet sense of closure. Davis's downfall was swift and dramatic, a fitting end to the twisted proceedings he had tried to manipulate. Within days, revelations about Vantage Biotech also spilled into public view. Several executives were indicted for their roles in framing Nadia and attempting to smuggle sensitive research abroad. Investigative journalists uncovered a web of financial transactions, implicating foreign investors who had aimed to profit off stolen biotech innovations. For Nadia, the whirlwind continued. She found herself the subject of countless headlines. The CIA officer wrongly accused, heroic whistleblower exposed corporate corruption, and so on. News outlets clamored for interviews, fascinated by her dual identity. Yet Nadia remained wary. She gave a single, measured press statement, emphasizing the dangers of corporate espionage and the importance of truth. She declined to celebrate her victory too openly. After all, she knew that the cost of her unmasking was the end of her covert field career. Back at CIA headquarters in Langley, she received a formal apology for the agency's delay in declassifying her mission. They offered her a position in a high-level analytical or advisory role, out of the field. She took time to consider her options, reflecting on whether she wanted to remain in the intelligence community or strike out in a new direction entirely. Weeks later, Nadia stood on the wide lawn in front of CIA headquarters, the towering emblem glinting in the afternoon sun. She walked past the memorial wall honoring fallen officers, thinking of the hidden sacrifices so many had made. Her own sacrifice, her cover, her reputation, seemed small compared to those who had given their lives. But it still hurt, a lingering ache in her chest. Marcus Powell joined her. "You did incredible work," he said quietly, hands folded behind his back. She looked at him, a faint smile on her lips. I barely escaped with my freedom. It was too close. Powell nodded. The agency is proud of you, Nadia. We all are. Vantage Biotech's infiltration could have jeopardized thousands of lives if that research was weaponized or sold off. She let the statement sink in. Her mission had been crucial. Even if the cost was her anonymity, it had been worth it. What now? She asked. He gestured toward the main building. They want you in a leadership role, maybe training the next generation of field operatives. With your expertise, you'd be invaluable. Nadia stared at the imposing structure. Part of her missed the thrill of covert missions. Another part was relieved never to endure such a harrowing ordeal again. I'll think about it, she said finally, turning to leave. Powell nodded and watched her go. She stepped off the front steps, heading toward the parking lot where her car waited. She wasn't sure where the next road would lead. Maybe back into the shadows of intelligence work, maybe somewhere entirely new. But she felt lighter, freed from the specter of false accusations. Months passed. The sensational trial receded from the headlines, replaced by the next wave of political dramas and international crises. Judge Davis languished in legal battles, indicted for corruption. Vantage Biotech's board faced restructuring and multiple lawsuits. As for Dr. Nadia West, she found a surprising sense of peace in her new role at the CIA, overseeing a team dedicated to preventing corporate infiltration. She traveled occasionally to speak at conferences on cybersecurity and biotech ethics, her name now carrying a weight of both cautionary tale and legend. One crisp autumn afternoon, she stood on a balcony overlooking the Potomac River. The water's flow reminded her of life's unpredictability, constant yet always changing. She sipped from a steaming mug of coffee, letting the cool breeze brush against her cheeks. Her phone chimed, a text from Faber. Hope you're well. Celebratory dinner soon? Nadia smiled, typing back. Yes, let's do it. We have a lot to celebrate. She lowered the phone, gazing out at the horizon. Despite all the turmoil, she was alive, free, and vindicated. The judge who had tried to silence her was silenced himself by his own misdeeds. The corporate forces that had framed her were exposed for their corruption. Justice, though delayed, had prevailed. And with that thought, Nadia turned away from the water and stepped back inside, closing the door on the storm that had once engulfed her life. She was done looking back. A new chapter awaited, one defined not by secrecy and false accusations, but by the rightful recognition of who she was. Dr. Nadia West, top CIA intelligence officer, a woman who refused to be silenced.